Okay, so what I'm going to be looking at today is the therapy session from the TV series Unbelievable. Now, I did watch this TV series when it came out, although I don't fully remember the therapy session in of itself. The session is for the character Marie. Now, just to make you aware, there are some sensitive topics that are discussed in this session, so just to be aware of that if you are watching this video. But what I'll be doing again is just having a look at some of the particular themes that come up during this session, some of my understanding as sort of how these are difficulties for Marie, and also looking a little bit at the therapist, their interventions, what I think is the reason that they're making those interventions, and some of the things that I'm picking up on that maybe I would do differently, or that I kind of like in terms of how the therapist approaches this session. But we'll take a look at some of the segments of this session, and then I'll sort of discuss a little bit about my sort of thoughts and views on what I see is happening.
How much time do we have?
About 8 minutes. But we can stop. I just have to get you to sign this.
Okay, so already we've got something to pick up on here. So Marie is asking how much time is left. And that, I can imagine that could be for potentially sort of several reasons when somebody asks about the time. For me, I'm sort of holding on to a few things there in this question. Is the person asking how much time is left because they're ready to finish? They don't want to be there, so they kind of would like the session to be over, or maybe that they're feeling uncomfortable being there, and they're kind of hoping that the session comes to an end soon because it is kind of a difficult place for them to be, or maybe somebody is asking about how much time is left because there's something that they would like to talk about before the session ends, but they're worried that if they begin to talk about that in the session, that there's not going to be enough time to discuss that. So for me as a therapist, that if somebody starts to ask me how much time is left, I'd probably want to ask them a little bit about why they're sort of asking about the time, because there's a reason that somebody will be asking about that.
I just have to get you to sign this.
So you're not even curious
About what?
about, like, why I'm here? The lying thing, like why I do that, or why I'd make something like that up?
Okay, so this is going to be quite a difficult piece for this therapist to manage here, because what you've got for Marie right now is a pretty loaded question. What she's asked there is, not only are you curious about sort of maybe what's going on for her, but she said, are you curious about why I lie and the reasons that I do that? Now, in a sense, like I say, that's a very loaded question that she's giving the therapist, because the therapist could reply to that and say, yeah, I'm curious about this, tell me a bit about it. Well, for Marie, she may be in a position where she doesn't see herself as a liar. She's been called a liar by other people, and there's a potential that the therapist is going to be put in a position here where here's another person that also thinks I'm a liar. So to agree to this statement by Marie right now is potentially setting yourself up for a lot of backpedaling, because you could potentially say, yes, I'm really curious about I'm really curious about this, Marie. And Marie could respond in, oh, so you think I'm a liar, and you're going to get into a very difficult situation with Marie if that does happen. So this is a very loaded question. It's going to be interesting to see how the therapist sort of manages the response to this without sort of falling into the trap of just confirming maybe what Marie is thinking that the therapist will be thinking about her to begin with.
Something like that up.
I'm curious about you, Marie. Who you are.
That's not what I asked.
Okay, so that's a really lovely response there from the therapist. She completely sidesteps this loaded question, and what she says is that I'm curious about you. So that's that's because that's ultimately, I imagine, the therapist is. I'm curious about you. I want to get to know you, and I want to help you. That's going to be the therapist's position. So what she does in that moment is completely sidestep this loaded question, and the loaded question of, are you curious about me being a liar? Now, straight away, Marie's response to that is to completely sort of dismiss the therapist's response there and say, well, that's not what I asked you, was it? So Marie's not letting up on this loaded question in a sense. What Marie wants to know is, I guess, potentially what she might be thinking is, do you think I'm a liar like other people think I'm a liar too? I imagine that's the reason for this question. And as a therapist, we potentially, a person that we're working with may try and pull us into a particular dynamic because they believe that we're going to think negatively or judge them in a way that other people have. And I think that's what's happening here with Marie, is that she's kind of trying to either pull the therapist into saying that she also thinks she's a liar, or she's maybe wanting to hear the opposite and saying that, are you going to be like these other people, or are you different than this? So again, I think that was a lovely intervention to begin with there from the therapist, but Marie has totally tried to bring this back in. She's not letting go of this conversation. So again, going to be interesting to see sort of what the therapist's response is to this.
No one makes up something like that unless there's an element of truth to it. Whether you were raped that night or invented a story about being raped that night, I think the truth is you've been violated.
Okay, so I've got a couple of concerns about that response, and also I understand why the therapist has responded in this way. So, like I was saying now, I think Marie's initial questions here is she's trying to put the therapist in a place, or she's trying to figure out where the therapist sits. Is she a person who thinks that I'm a liar? Is she a person that's going to believe what I have to say? And I think that's what that question is trying to figure out what this therapist is about, really. Now, the therapist has responded in a way, I think, to sort of try and suggest and say, I believe you, Marie, that, and she's sort of sidestepping it slightly by saying, I think there must be some truth to what you're saying right now. But I think that's a very difficult place for the therapist to position herself, because maybe what's going to happen now is Marie's going to take that in several sort of different ways potentially. What she might hear there is that I think you're a liar, because what she said is that maybe when it comes to the rape, that might not be true. In a sense, that was kind of what that was saying just then. And Marie might hear that and think, oh well, you think I'm potentially a liar. My sense in this is what a better way to go about this is to really not actually put yourself in that position to say whether or not you believe she's true, because whichever way you go in it, you're potentially gonna end up with an issue that's going to be hard to manage. For me, maybe what I would have potentially seen as a more helpful thing is to sort of address this and say, okay, well, you're asking me now whether or not I see you as a liar. I wonder why you're asking me that. Why is that important to you? What does that mean to you? So kind of pushing it back onto Marie instead. And I think in that way you're going to sidestep this whole potential dynamic that's almost trying to get sort of played out here in a sense. And I'd be worried now as a therapist about how Marie's going to respond to this. It may be that Marie sees it the other way and says, oh, okay, well, this therapist believes me. She knows that there must be some truth in this, because she understands that people don't make things up like this. But there's several ways in which she could interpret this, which potentially could cause an issue in the therapy if she sees it as this therapist is somebody who maybe doesn't believe her. You're also, as a therapist in this situation here, you're getting in a position of sort of being the person who's making judgments on somebody else's situation. That isn't really the therapist's job to do that. The therapist's job is to help somebody with whatever their problem is. So this whole conversation, that response to me, I felt like what the therapist was trying to do was to say, I believe you. I believe what you're saying, but I'm wondering what Marie's response is going to be to that, or how she will sort of take that response.
I think the truth is you've been violated. You're carrying burdens that were dumped on you by people who didn't love you as well as you deserve to be loved. And that's what I'm curious about. How I might help you carry those burdens a little more lightly.
Okay, so that's followed up then with a little bit more from this therapist here, and I think there's some lovely parts into what she's saying there. So what she's pointing out in a way in this moment how she may be able to help Marie. She's pointing out that I guess whatever's happened, she's saying you're carrying pain. You're carrying something here that's probably weighing you down. That's heavy to carry. And what the therapist is saying there is that I can help you alleviate in some ways this pain that you're carrying. Now, it might be a little bit wishy-washy on the language that the therapist has sort of used there, but I think that's a lovely intervention. And what you can see in Marie's face right now is actually she's looking up at the therapist, and there's some sadness there. And my sense is that's because Marie, in this moment in time, has actually found that really empathic and compassionate to hear that. My sense is that she's picking up right now that this therapist actually cares. She's curious about me. She wants to help me. And to me, that's the look that you're getting there, is somebody that's starting to build a bit of a therapeutic relationship with the therapist. So I think in part there's some lovely bits in what the therapist has said there, because it's important to kind of point out to somebody how you can help them as well. That this is a problem you have, and this is maybe something I can help you with. And I think that has sort of resonated with Marie in this moment to hear that from the therapist.
Or maybe even lay some of them down. But this is your time. And we have a few minutes.
Okay, so that's again another lovely intervention there. This is your time. And I think, again, that's a really important bit to separate out. So the therapist is saying, I can help you alleviate some of the burden of the pain that you're carrying, by kind of doing some work on that and helping you maybe process some of these emotions. We can alleviate some of the problem it has, but also recognizing that this is Marie's time, and you can so basically you're saying, I can help you, but it's for you to decide whether that's something you want for yourself. And I think that's a really lovely little bit there of interventions in that, because it's really important to point out to somebody in therapy that actually it's their choice on whether they want to work on something, and to gain that consent from them that they want to work on this, and that they are happy and okay to work on that. Because as a therapist, we may be seeing somebody and say, I can see where the problem is and the difficulty is. But for the person in therapy, they may be sort of sat there thinking, well, actually, that's all well and good, but for me, that isn't a problem I want to work on. So, I think that's kind of a lovely thing that the therapist has said. I think another thing to think about with that as well is that for somebody that has experienced abuse, in whichever form that abuse that is, that normally has happened because somebody's boundaries have been violated in some way. So I think it's really important for therapy with somebody that has been abused in some way, is that you really reinforce with that person that actually this is their choice on what gets spoken about. It's absolutely their choice on what they want to work on, and they have every right to say no. And the consent is so important in this. You want to be consenting all the time with somebody here. That is it okay for us to work on this? We've recognised the problem. Is this something you want to work on? So I think that's really lovely from the therapist there. They're saying, this is absolutely your decision. There's no pressure on you here to do anything you don't want to do. which, you know, I imagine, and you can see again in Marie's face there, there's some sadness, so she's engaged with the therapist in this conversation.
And we have a few minutes. If there's something you want to tell me about that night, I would love to listen.
Okay, so I think there's like 3 or 4 really lovely interventions there from the therapist. And that bit there as well is she's saying, if you want to talk about this with me, I would love to hear it. So she's opening herself there and saying, look, I'm here to listen to this. And she's, you know, so that what we've got here is, Marie, this is for you, what you want to work on. If you would like to work on and talk about what you've been through, then that's your choice. But I'm here, I can help you with that, and that I would love to help you with that if you want me to. So, you know, to hear that as somebody who's in therapy, that's going to be such a really helpful thing to hear. You know, the communication from this therapist, you're letting the person know that it's up to them whether they want to work on something, but you're going to be there with them if they do want to work with it. So again, that whole piece there, I think, is really lovely in the work that the therapist has done with Marie.
So basically, you were assaulted twice. Once by your attacker, then again by the police.
I guess.
I am so sorry.
Okay, so I guess we don't get to see the bit right now where Marie discusses this, but it sounds like this has sort of moved forwards now. So the interventions that the therapist used for Marie, obviously either whether this is the same session or a different session, but there's a progression forwards in where Marie has felt able to voice some of the problems that she's had. And I don't think that would have happened without the therapist helping Marie know that she's there to help. So again, I think that intervention has helped move this along. But what we're hearing right now then is that obviously Marie has been discussing some of the issues that she's had, and I guess some of the things that she's been dealing with. And the therapist there highlights and points out that not only was the attack a violation on you, an assault, but actually the way that the police have treated you as well. And what you get back from Marie there is that she says, I guess so. So to me, when I hear the words I guess so, or in a sense the person isn't fully confirming that they believe that too. So that might be something that needs to sort of be picked up on with Marie here, is that why she's saying I guess so. The therapist is saying you know that you've been violated twice, and then Marie saying, well, I guess I have been, rather than yeah, I agree with you. Now, I my guess is the reason that the therapist has pointed this out is that sometimes people don't realise what classes as abuse or a violation against us. Sometimes things can be obvious what they are, but my assumption here is that when she's talking about the police, maybe Marie hasn't acknowledged or seen that the treatment from the police has also been sort of abusive towards her as well, or a violation against her. And so my sense is the therapist is sort of bringing that in because she wants to help highlight that actually that wasn't okay too. And the fact that Marie's responded with I guess so, for me, I would kind of want to pick up on that and say, okay, well, I've just said this to you, but you seem unsure, and you're unsure as whether you want to agree with what I've just said. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what's stopping you from agreeing to that statement, because maybe for Marie she doesn't see it in that way. Maybe she's scared to acknowledge it in that way because it's the police, these people in an authoritative position. But you'll get to know a lot more if you sort of question about why Marie gave that response.
I am so sorry, Marie.
It's not your fault.
It's brave of you to revisit it. That's not easy. Thank you for trusting me.
Okay, so there's a bit there that I like and a bit there that I'm not sort of sure about really. So I think it's really nice to help highlight with somebody the strength it's taken to discuss something that's difficult. So I think for the therapist there to kind of say to Marie, actually, this has been really brave to do this. In a sense, it's highlighting the difficulty that she faces by talking about this. So maybe kind of that's helping to acknowledge the difficulty of this, and not just sort of dismiss it as not being something that was hard to do. So I kind of find that bit sort of helpful in that. I'm not sure a little bit here about kind of the thanking bit for trusting me as well, because you don't know if Marie trusts the therapist right now. She might be somebody that sort of agrees with people in authority and goes along with what they want. So for me, I wouldn't want to make that assumption. I would maybe want to ask her, what was that like to trust me and open up to me? What was that experience like for you? Because I'd want to confirm from Marie first that she actually does trust me, and that actually and how that was for her. Because if you're kind of thanking somebody, say, oh, thanks for putting that trust in me, for all we know, that Marie might have actually found that quite an uncomfortable thing to do, and really sort of struggled with that. So I think it's always helpful, rather than to just make an assumption as a therapist about what's happened, is to actually ask about it and get the person's perspective on it instead. What was that like to trust me with your experience? How do you feel for doing that now? And if you get that kind of like a confirmation from an agreement from Marie that actually she does trust you, and that it's helpful for her to do that, then maybe you can sort of acknowledge or sort of this thanking bit. But again, I'm a little bit sort of unsure as to sort of the wording with that. But again, it's sort of, I think it's helping to help Marie sort of see the compassion and empathy that comes from the therapist, or I think that's what the therapist is trying to show.
Can I ask you one thing before you go?
Okay.
Understanding that none of this was your fault. It was a horrible situation that was imposed on you. I wonder if there's something of value you can take from it. This might not be the last time in your life that you're...
Okay, so I'm really, that felt kind of, I'm really sort of cringing a little bit about the therapist and her intentions with what she said there. So what we're getting right now is that the therapy's coming to an end, or at least this session. And what the therapist has said there is, this horrific, awful thing has happened to you, or interpreting her words, this horrific, awful thing has happened to you. Can you take something positive from this horrific, awful experience? Who's that for, really, in this moment in time? Why does Marie need to take something positive away from this horrific ordeal that she's been through, really? To me, hearing that, so within a therapy session, what you have is the defenses of the person in therapy, the client, for want of a better word, and the therapist also has defenses that kick in. So if you imagine Marie's sat there, that maybe her defense is kicking in, or that I'm not going to talk about this, I'm going to minimize, or I'm not going to acknowledge actually the pain that I've got, because then I don't have to face the pain. But the therapist also has defenses too. And what's happened here is that the therapist has heard right now a really distressing, horrific account of what's happened for Marie, would be my guess. If they've spoken about sort of the abuse that's happened, then that's likely that's going to be the case. Now, it can be hard to acknowledge that somebody has been through a horrific, painful experience that there is no resolution to, in the sense of like taking something positive from it. And I wonder here if this therapist's response is saying, okay, we've looked at this really distressing thing right now. Can we sort of tie it up in a neat little bow here and say, okay, well, maybe you can take something good from this, because then we'll both feel better that actually this wasn't just an awful event that happened. So for me, that's, I find that really kind of uncomfortable. for the therapist to sort of imply that, because maybe for Marie she started thinking, well, I've got literally nothing, there's nothing I'm taking away from that as being an experience that that I can take anything away from in a positive sense. So yeah, for me that feels like an uncomfortable thing. I can kind of make sense of maybe what the therapist is trying to do with this, is saying, okay, well, let's see what let's see what you can build up in yourself as you move forwards from this. That let's focus in on your strength. Let's focus in on on something in this that you can take away. That doesn't mean this whole thing was sort of a distressing experience. But yeah, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with somebody taking that position, really, because for Marie that might not be her experience at all, and to be told that she has to take something away from it as like a positive, that she might find that really dismissing of actually the distress that she's been through.
Something of value you can take from it. This might not be the last time in your life that you're misunderstood or mistrusted. I just wonder if there's a way to think about it, about how you might manage this kind of injustice if it were to happen again.
Okay, I know I'm supposed to say if I had to do it over, I wouldn't lie. But the truth is, I would lie earlier.
Okay, so what I'm picking up on in myself, sort of on that little segment there, was some anger towards the therapist. That's kind of the emotional response I was having, and I think that was in part because that, like I say, I think the therapist's intention here is to sort of try and find this nice solution to some extent to this, obviously what Marie has been through here. And I think Marie's response to that is to say, look, I know what you want me to do right now is to say that this is resolved and that I'm going to be different moving forwards, and that that I will deal with things in a different way than in a better way than what I've dealt with before. But what Marie's saying is that's not going to be the case. That actually this is a very complicated, difficult, distressing thing that she's been through. And Marie obviously has certain coping mechanisms that she uses to manage that. And I think for a therapist to presume that maybe like within a session they're going to resolve something and move forwards and she's going to be different, I think is very unlikely to happen. So I think Marie's response there is that she's pointing out, yeah, I know what you want me to say, I know what you want from me, but I'm not going to give you that, because actually that's not what I think. And for me, I think that's kind of, there's maybe a little bit of a differences of opinion right now between Marie and the therapist. But I think that's really nice of Marie there to point that out to the therapist and say, look, I'm not there. You maybe would like me to be at that point in time where I'm going to give you this sort of positive statement that you can sort of then feel better, alleviate some of your own distress about this, but that's not where I am at.
No matter how much someone says they care about you, they just don't. Not enough. I mean, maybe they mean to, or they try to, but other things end up being more important.
Okay, so what we're getting from Marie right now then is, I think part of her, I'll use a clinical term here, but kind of core attachment style. And what I mean by that is kind of basically the relationship she's had in the past and experiences she's had that have kind of developed in terms of how she perceives relationships to be. And what she's saying here then is that her relationship blueprint from the past has been that people aren't there for her in the way that she needed them to be there. And my guess is that carries a lot of pain for her. and there's probably kind of a lot of unresolved pain in that. That what she's saying is that she doesn't expect that she can trust people. The people, I imagine, sort of what she's saying has sort of let her down. So this bit right now, I think, really highlights her relationship dynamics from the past, and depending on sort of the work that she's doing with the therapist right now, that might be worth picking up on, and maybe asking her, okay, well, do you have other particular memories you have of people who've treated you this way? Because there's probably some unresolved pain here that she's carrying for that may be kind of helpful to sort of work through the pain from these relationships from the past.
Start with that. Lying. Because even with good people, even with people that you can kind of trust, if the truth is inconvenient, if the truth doesn't fit, they don't believe it.
Okay, so what Marie's talking about right now then is the way that she relates to people and the way that she's learnt to have to relate to people because of the experiences that she's had. So when she's talking here about lying, what she's referring to is that lying serves a function for her, because what sounds like has happened is that people in her past have hurt her, and probably when she's been open and honest to them, what's happened is that they've not been there for her in the way that she needed them to be. So what she's done is she's learned that if she lies, that protects her from experiencing those situations again. And I think the important thing to think about in this sense is that's kind of a coping mechanism, defense mechanism that she uses, but it comes at a price to her. And I think this is an important thing as well that can be picked up on in therapy, is that people have defenses and coping mechanisms that they've learned to use because of what's happened to them in the past and the environments they're in. They had to deal with it in that way. But normally what happens is that those particular coping mechanisms at some point in time end up causing problems for us. And it's almost like we need to update the ways in which we deal with these specific situations. So what Marie's sort of saying right now is that people let you down. People maybe aren't there, and people don't meet your needs fully in the way that you need them to be met. And that can be true. There are people in our lives that maybe do that. But the tactic she has right now is to lie in order to stop that from happening. So that might be something here that would be worth working on with Marie, is actually, rather than necessarily the therapist saying, well, what you can do is maybe stop doing this thing that you've done. For Marie, this is a survival technique. People don't just give up on survival techniques just because they're told that it's no good for them. What you kind of need to do then is to actually update these defenses and coping mechanisms that Marie uses, because they're like I say, these are survival mechanisms that she's used. Just because you're told to stop using something, you're not automatically going to stop using it, because part of you will think, well, if I stop using this, then I'm kind of not safe. That's the purpose of defense mechanisms that we have. So I think in this would be a really important piece of work to do with Marie, is that, okay, well, actually you use lying to help you manage these situations. Well, let's have a look and see, what would be a different way of dealing with people letting you down? Or, how do you protect yourself from that in a different way that means you don't have to use lying as your sort of main defense mechanism? So I think there's definitely more work that can be done here with Marie around that. But what she's highlighting here is the way that she manages relationships and the way that she manages the pain that she's experienced in her relationships before.
Even if they really care about you, they just don't.
Okay, so again, this is kind of reinforcing, I think, sort of Marie's relationship she's had with people and her expectations of what she will get from people. I think kind of looking at this session as a whole, what I see is a lot of good from the therapist in terms of that where this session has moved to right now. would not have happened if the initial groundwork hadn't been put in place by the therapist to help Marie see that she's there and that she's okay to talk about things if she wants to, and the therapist is going to be there with her when she opens up about these things. So I think that's some really lovely work that's gone on there. And what's happened is you've got all this information that's coming up right now that gives you a sense of Marie's difficulties and what needs to be worked on in order to help Marie. So I think that's some really lovely work that's happened there with the therapist to get to this point. Obviously, there's a few bits there that sort of I've picked up on that are maybe things that could have been done differently in this session. But, I think given that, it's easy for me to sit here and sort of pause and sort of reflect on this and sort of pick those little bits apart. This is moving in a good direction, because actually you're getting to the sort of the core of the problem. And by getting there, you can then work on it together. So I think all in all, actually, there's a lot of good in this therapy, and my guess would be if this was in real life and this was sort of the work you were doing with somebody, that they're engaged in the work, that they're working with you as the therapist, and actually that there's a potential here to do some really nice work with Marie to help her with the struggles that she has.